if you are serious about making a run for it.
We must keep going! The snow is blinding us!
Just keep walking.
The film begins by showing a man who was being interrogated in a narrow room. He is Janusz, someone who is accused of being a spy. The Soviet Union actually realized that Janusz would not answer their questions, so they dragged Janusz's wife to be interrogated and under threats. And I don't know what happened so that Janusz's wife betrayed him by saying that her husband was a member of the Communist Party, who was spying on Stalin. As punishment, Janusz and the other prisoners were sent to Gulag, Siberia, for 20 years. Gulag prison was chosen because of its location, which is surrounded by wild nature, and the temperature is so cold that prisoners who try to escape will die on the way. Apart from that, the Soviet Union also gave rewards to local residents who managed to catch the escaped prisoners, and this is where the nightmare started for Janusz. No less scary than the conditions outside the Gulag prison, inside the prison is even scarier. They queued very long for the distribution of food rations, and there was also a special queue for people with night blindness. Gulag prison is indeed a terrible prison. The prisoners are left malnourished and without vitamins at all. Sometimes the prisoners had to fight just for a piece of bread, like Smith, one of the prisoners who picked up his food when he fell, even though there were other prisoners who were very hungry. Janusz, who couldn't bear to, then gave some of his food to the prisoner. Smith then said that if Janusz behaved like that, it could kill himself. A little later, Janusz made a new friend named Andres, who was an actor because his films alluded to the Stalinist government. Apart from that, Andres is also a foreigner who was arrested because he is from America. The crimes of Janusz and Andres are nothing compared to Valka, who is a big-time thief and murderer. Valka also doesn't hesitate to hurt people if his wishes are not fulfilled.
Возьми пальто.
Хочу свитер.
The friendship of Janusz and Andres makes them closer and makes them think of an escape plan. It turns out that Andres already knows a lot about the weak points in prison. The problem is, where are they going after they manage to escape from the prison? They realized that the northern, western and eastern regions were still under Soviet control. They only had the option of going south past Lake Baikal and straight to the Mongolian border. After finalizing the escape plan, they gathered supplies first. They also invited the other prisoners to flee with them. Day after day they pass with the routine of being a woodcutter, Smith, who at first looks cruel but has a brave and caring nature. This he showed when the prisoners were caught in a snowstorm. Many of the prisoners froze to death after being forced to work. Smith ordered the prisoners to take cover behind the trees, but the guard refused and ordered everyone to keep walking. Smith refused and instead went into the trees even though the guard was pointing his gun. The guards thought and did not want to lose many prisoners because of the blizzard, so he ordered the prisoners to follow Smith. It was at this moment that Janusz, Smith, Andres, Zoran, Andre and Kazik became acquainted with each other for the first time. That night, the guards were still annoyed with Smith's behavior, so he and Janusz were transferred to a more dangerous place to work, namely in the mines. The stuffy air and the many explosions made Janusz helpless and often had hallucinations. That's why Janusz told Smith his intention to run away. But Smith said not to blindly trust Andres, because he likes to lie. Even so, Smith still supports his escape plan and will also join him. A few days later, Janusz finalized his plan. It was true, apparently Andres was indeed a liar and a coward. Because Andres always had many excuses when Janusz was about to execute his plan, Valka apparently overheard the debate and made him think about joining them. On the other hand, Smith was tasked with negotiating with the prisoner who was in charge of guarding the generator, and he said that Smith only had a 10-minute chance to escape after the generator was turned off. Once everything was ready, Janusz and the others agreed to flee during the blizzard, as the aftermath of the storm was able to wash away their footprints during the escape. Suddenly Valka came and threatened Janusz to let him go on the escape. They had no choice and let Valka go because if they didn't obey, Valka could kill him. Finally they escaped by cutting the fence wire first. In the middle of the blizzard they all managed to escape without being noticed by the guards. Long story short, they had walked 20 kilometers, they took a short break and then Janusz started collecting food from those who came along. Valka, who used to be arrogant, is now kind and submissive to Janusz. They continued their journey. Janusz said it took around 4 weeks to reach Lake Baikal. Not only did they have to endure extreme, unpredictable weather, they also had to deal with their respective weaknesses. Like Kazik, who has night blindness, he gets lost at night while looking for wood for a bonfire. Kazik couldn't see at all, which made him hallucinate. It made him lose his way and froze to death. His friends immediately buried Kazik and they continued their journey. They had been walking for weeks but still had not found the lake in question, and they had even run out of food supplies. Meanwhile, Smith, who can fish, uses his skill to treat his hunger. But over time the fish stocks ran out because of the constant fishing. At this point Valka started to go crazy and hallucinate. He suggested killing one of them and consuming it, but Janusz refused. Janusz remained confident that he would find Lake Baikal, where they could find lots of food. That night a pack of wolves appeared who were eating the deer. Valka and the others chased the wolves away and took the rest of the deer meat. From here it can be seen how hungry and depressed they were by the situation. They ate the rest of the deer meat like starving animals. The next day, Janusz decided to go to Lake Baikal alone, considering that his friend's condition was no longer possible for them to continue walking. With some supplies prepared by Smith, Janusz left. The next challenge was even more extreme. Janusz had to face the ferocity of the wild, which even made him hallucinate. He almost gave up on these conditions, but thanks to his persistence and belief, Janusz finally arrived at Lake Baikal. A week passed. Janusz returned to Smith and his friends who were still waiting for him, even though he arrived in a very worrying condition. They all finally went to follow Janusz to Lake Baikal. On their way they were followed by a mysterious person who turned out to be a Polish woman who had escaped from the Soviet Union. Just like Janusz and his friends, this woman was also lost without food. After Janusz and his friends received Irina, the woman's name, they all headed to Lake Baikal. However, Smith thought that Irina would only add to their burden, because of course a woman like her would whine when she was tired. At Lake Baikal they all stayed for several days. They gathered back the strength and energy that had been drained during the journey. They start cleaning themselves by bathing, washing clothes, shaving and so on. The journey continued. Then Smith asked Irina where she lived. She said that she used to live on a farm near Warsaw and her parents were killed by Soviet soldiers. Apparently Smith was suspicious because Warsaw was German territory, not the Soviets. Smith immediately told Irina not to lie. When they arrived at a settlement, Valka took the initiative to go there, but Janusz prevented him because the residents there might catch or kill them. The arrogant Valka ignored Janusz's words. She still went to look for food in the village. After disappearing for a while, Valka returned with a lot of meat, while his friends suspected that he had killed one of the villagers after seeing bloodstains on his clothes. Valka argued that it was the blood of the dog he killed. He also managed to steal alcohol to celebrate his birthday. It was while eating together that Irina finally admitted that she had lied about her past. Irina is actually the child of a Polish couple with communist beliefs. They lived well in Moscow, but suddenly her parents were arrested on charges of being spies. This incident had an impact on Irina's life, which became unclear. She was on the street with no direction. They went through day after day until they finally arrived at the border. Irina, who was initially considered a burden, has now become something positive. Her nature is sociable and easy to get along with, which makes everyone like her. Smith was even touched when Irina treated his feet, which were badly injured due to the long journey. By the way, Valka was the only person in this group who was still pro-Soviet and defended the Stalin regime. Therefore Valka stopped for a moment when he arrived at the border between the Soviets and Mongolia, even though he knew he could be caught, but for him it was not a problem. At least he could be held in a better prison than the Gulag before. This moment is the last time we see Valka. Because of his arrogance, he just leaves. Even though they have arrived at the border, apparently this is not the end of their journey, because Mongolia also adheres to communist ideology, which is certainly not safe to live in. The situation also got worse after they found a temple that had been attacked by communist soldiers. Andres, who was a priest, was concerned about the fact that even places of worship were not spared from their brutal attacks. They rested for a while because they were confused about where to go. Janusz had a pretty bold idea. He decided to go with his friends on foot through the Himalayan mountains via India. In addition, they could also ask for British military protection, which at that time was occupying India. This is where their second long journey begins, while having to face hunger as well as other challenges. They walked with only a bottle of water. The terrain this time was more extreme than before, where before there were more frequent ice and snowstorms, while now the desert is dry and barren. In the middle of the trip, Smith was involved in an argument with Janusz about the source of water, which Smith saw from his surprise, which turned out to be a mirage. But it turned out that Janusz was wrong, because what they saw was really an oasis. They immediately ran towards the oasis while quenching their thirst, bathing, and cleaning themselves. They spent the night there, but after realizing that they had run out of food, they continued their journey. Before leaving, they filled bottles with water, but unfortunately the water they brought had to be wasted, because there was a terrible sandstorm. Meanwhile, Irina's condition was getting weaker, coupled with her swollen leg, which made her unable to walk anymore. Andres then carried Irina, but because her condition was getting worse, this is where she finally died and was buried in the desert. They continued their journey. One by one they had to fall. Next is Tomasz, who has a swollen leg. He must die just like Irina. A few days later, Smith's condition also worsened, making him unable to move at all. At this point, it is a very critical part. We are presented with how the remaining four of them have to fight against death, which is ready to come at any time. Smith, who was helpless, ordered Janusz and the others to continue their journey, but Janusz refused. Instead, he ordered Andres and Zoran to go first while carrying Smith. Evening came. Thankfully, they could stay together. The next morning, Zoran was shocked because a snake crossed his feet. Hoping that the snake could lead him to a water source, so Zoran followed the snake. Sure enough, they found a puddle of water even though it was mixed with sand. After that, they killed and ate the snake. After being tormented by the hot desert for so long, they finally found a river. They spent a few moments bathing and carrying enough water supplies for the next journey. So many days they walked, without realizing they had arrived at the Great Wall of China. They finally arrived at the Tibetan border. Janusz and his friends were welcomed by the residents there. They were even told to stay and were given food like guests. When they gathered, Janusz then asked about the nearest route to India. One of the residents said that they could explore the mountains until they found a small village which was part of Indian territory. The man also said that the people there were very kind, they could provide food and shelter. The problem was that the current weather was not conducive to traveling there, so they had to wait until spring. Janusz thought that they could face any situation, so they decided to continue their journey the next day. Apparently, there was a difference of opinion where Smith decided that he would go alone to China and then look for an American military base and take shelter there. Meanwhile, Andres and Zoran preferred to wait until spring arrives. The next day, Janusz left alone. Andres and Zoran immediately followed him. After an extreme journey, they finally arrived at a village on the outskirts of India. They were welcomed by the government and residents there.
Welcome to India.
Where have you come from? Siberia.
Which was the happy end of Janusz and his friend's journey after traveling 6,400 kilometers to seek freedom, as this film ends. That's all the recap. Don't forget to share happiness with the whole world and creatures on this earth. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to activate the notification bell so that you are constantly updated with recaps of our latest films. We would really appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel. We're signing off, and goodbye.